This will be tape number 7 of this 12-tape set of recordings made on the Serenity Sail and the Big Book Cruise. This talk was given on Wednesday evening, August the 31st, 1988, while cruising off of St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. On this tape, Charley discusses Chapter 5, How It Works, through Step 3, pages 58 through 64 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The approximate listening time for this recording will be 81 minutes.
I think we'll start our session tonight on gluttony. I tell you, the way I've been eating, it's not only sinful, it's just downright ridiculous. Isn't it fun, though? Yeah, it's nice to be able to go places like this and enjoy yourself and do the things you want to do and laugh and have a good time. We've covered a lot of ground in the Big Book. We've certainly been able to see what the problem is through the doctor's opinion and through Bill's story. Been able to see the disease, the hopeless condition of the mind and of the body. Been able to identify with, see another alcoholic recover from the disease. We were able in Chapter 2 to see the solution to our disease and also why we need that solution. The first half of Chapter 2 talking about people like us, explaining why the fellowship alone is not enough, explaining why and how we've placed ourselves beyond human aid, and convincing us that it would be necessary to have more than just the fellowship in order to recover. Also in Chapter 2, we talked about the common solution, the simple kit of tools, spiritual tools laid at our feet, which leads to the spiritual experience or the personality change sufficient to recover from the disease of alcoholism. Then in Chapter 3, we could see exactly why we were going to have that vital spiritual experience. As in Chapter 3, we dealt with the insanity of alcoholism. We dealt with that thing we must be restored from, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity. And we could see that the main problem of the alcoholic centers in the mind rather than the body. The insane idea that this time it's going to be different. This time we'll learn to drink like other people. Or this time I won't get drunk. Or this time I can mix it with whiskey. I'm mix it with milk. I'm taking it on a full stomach. Or so on and so forth. Believing of the lie immediately preceding the taking of the first drink. And we could see in that chapter that no human power can keep that from happening to us from time to time. Because there are certain times we're simply unable to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the suffering and the pain and the humiliation of even a week or a month ago. Now, I don't believe that he's talking only about practicing alcoholics. I think he's talking also about people who have been sober for a period of time. Because quite often we see people in AA that's been sober for a year, 2, 5, 10, 8, 15, 20, and 25 years go back and get drunk. Now, surely when that happens to them, the insanity has returned. And they've begun to believe again that they could drink. There's just no way that one of us today, here in this room, could drink on the truth. There's just no way we could do that. In order for me to go down town in St. Thomas today and drink on the truth, I would have to walk in one of those places down there where they were selling that booze. They had it on sale. And I'd walk in there and I'd say, "Mister, I drank some of that 18 some odd years ago and it damn near killed me. Put me in a divorce court in a jailhouse in a hospital. What would you charge me for another bottle so I can do that again?" That's the truth. Now, there's no way I could drink on that. The truth would have to disappear, and I would have to think that this time it's going to be different. Or probably what I would really forget is 18 some odd years ago. And I'd go in there and say, "Mister, I had some fun with that 18 years ago. I had a glorious time with it. Sell me another bottle of it so I can do that again." Well, that's a damn lie. Now, see, I can't drink on the truth, period. Also, we saw in the chapter to the agnostic where our real problem was a lack of power. We could see where if our morals and philosophies of life had saved us, we wouldn't have had to come to the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it tells us that our main problem is a lack of power. And the main object of the book is to enable us to find that power, greater than human power, which will solve our problem for us. It showed us the beginning of the finding of the power is a very simple thing. We only have to believe, or be willing to believe. And if we can believe or be willing to believe, then we can start from that point, and upon that belief, then we can make a decision. And then upon that decision, we can take action, and then sure enough, we can get results. And then we will know. We will no longer have to believe. We saw a very simple process which changes us from being a non-believer, or one who believes and acts as a non-believer, to one who has become a true believer, to one who now knows. And we follow that process and we receive that power. And we use the example of Columbus to show how that would be accomplished. We also found that this power, really, we didn't have to look for it very hard, because we found in the book that God dwells within all human beings. And it told us that deep down in every man, woman, and child is this fundamental idea of God, and said in reality it is only there that he may be found. It was so with us. And that takes me back to the spiritual experience in Appendix 2, when it said, when we become aware of the fact we have tapped an unsuspected inner resource of strength, that we identify with a power greater than ourselves, and we know we've had that personality change. So again, we're dealing with a power that dwells within each of us, if we can simply bring that power to the surface. Now, the night Bill got to this point in the book, they tell us that he was in bed one night. The first 4 chapters had been completed and had been pretty well accepted by the rest of the fellowship. And Bill was trying to get started on chapter 5. Now, what they all had been using up to that point, they had taken the tenets of the Oxford groups, these such things as surrender and restitution and various other different things, and they had made 6 little steps out of those, and they had been using those steps, but Bill could see in those steps certain loopholes that the alcoholic mind could slip through. And he felt that the steps needed to be broadened out a little bit, that maybe some more needed to be put in there in order to keep us from slipping through those loopholes and escaping from what that we're really trying to accomplish through the process of the steps. And they tell us that the night he tried to write those things, he was in bed, pillow behind his back, propped against the headboard, pad and pencil in hand, which is one of the ways that he loved to write. And I'm sure he had gone through in his head, I've already given them everything they need now in order to be able to really begin the program of recovery. We've talked about the disease, we've talked about the solution, we've talked about a solution we can live with, and I'm sure he said in his own mind, now it's time to get down to details and tell them what they're going to have to do in order to find that solution. And he tried and he tried and he tried, and he simply could not get started. And he always said that he laid his pad and pencil down, prayed and meditated for a few minutes, and then he picked the pad and pencil up and he began to write, and he said it felt as if the pencil had a mind of its own, that as it raced across the page and the words began to appear, he felt as if they were really not coming from him, but they were coming from another source. And he wrote what we know today as how it works in approximately 15, 20, 25 minutes, somewhere in that area. And then when he went back and looked at it, he counted the number of steps, and he realized he had written 12 steps. And in his mind, somehow, some way, he associated that with the 12 apostles. But he did not sit down and say, this is going to be step 1 and this is going to be step 2. He didn't really count till he went back and he found that he had written the 12 steps. Now, he was highly elated at the writing of the 12 steps. And I think you and I would be too. You know, he'd been procrastinating, putting off, and finally the job is done. And Bill looked at them and he felt that they would accomplish what he had in mind. Now, shortly thereafter, one of the older members of the group came by, and he had a new pigeon with him. And Bill could hardly wait to show this fellow what he had written and how it works. And he showed it to the fellow, and the older member didn't like it at all. He said, "Bill, what the hell is this? What do you mean by 12 steps?" And he said, "What do you mean by telling people what they have to do?" And he said, "Who the hell wants to get rid of all their character defects? And who is going to make amends to other people?" And the argument started right there. And then that argument went on for months and months and months in reality, until finally what Bill had written originally was changed into what we see in our book today. Now tonight we're going to read how it works, and we're going to read it from the original manuscript. And my friend Bernie up here is going to read it, and Bernie will try through the tone of his voice or changing his voice in some way to point out the differences. And if you'd like to go through your book with him, you may want to mark some of these differences in your book. You'll find that there's several changes been made. Bernie?
I'm Bernie. I'm a real alcoholic.
Hi, Bernie.
Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our directions. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They seem to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a way of life which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we're like now. If you have decided that you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to follow directions. At some of these, you may balk. You may think you can find an easier, softer way. We doubt if you can. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that you are dealing with alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. Without help, it can be too much for you. But there is one who has all power. That one is God. You must find him now. Half measures will avail you nothing. You stand at the turning point. Throw yourself under his protection and care with complete abandon. Now we think you can take it. Here are the steps we took, which are suggested as your program of recovery. 1. Admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care and direction of God as we understood him. 4. Made a fearless or searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. Were entirely willing that God remove all these defects of character. 7. Humbly, on our knees, ask him to remove our shortcomings, holding nothing back.
That'd be pretty rough, wouldn't it?
Tough. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make complete amends to them all. 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our contact with God, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had a spiritual experience as the result of this course of action, we try to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and to practice these principles in all our affairs. You may exclaim, "What an order! I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we've set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after have been designed to sell you three pertinent ideas. A, that you are an alcoholic and cannot manage your life, your own life. B, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism. C, that God can and will. If you're not convinced of these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away.
You know, there's so many things there that's different, and so many vital points that it's always baffles me where to even begin talking about these things. But as it came through to me tonight as I listened to Bernie read that, you know, originally these were not called steps. Originally these were called directions. Also originally, when he talked about this thing, he didn't talk about we. He talked about what you are going to have to do. Also, when he talked about this thing, he talked about you must. Now, there's some big changes from that to what it is today. Also, he called this a program of action. When he said, here are the steps we took which are suggested as your program of recovery. And then in step 12, he said, having had a spiritual experience as the result of this course. And remember, what Ebby brought to him was a practical program of action. So we can see again some words were changed. I think also it's quite obvious in the reading of this what Bill intended for the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters to be. Because when he said our description of the alcoholic, he's talking about the doctor's opinion. He's talking about the first half of chapter 2. He's talking about some of chapter 3. In all those areas, we had a description of the alcoholic. Then the chapter to the agnostic, which is chapter 4. Hello. Oh, he gets there on time, every time, doesn't he?
The DJ and engagement dining room is now open for all passengers on second sitting for dinner. Our Caribbean dinner for all second sitting passengers is now being served. Ladies and gentlemen, as a kind reminder, shorts is not proper coat at dinner time. Thank you and have a pleasant evening.
Thank you. He said our description of the alcoholic, the chapter of the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after Bill's story, and of course those in the back of the book, have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas. Now remember, Bill is a salesman, and he is a crackerjack salesman. Sometimes I marvel at how he sold us in the big book. You know, we come here trying to find a way to drink. And the next thing you know, we have found sobriety, and then before he's through with us, hell, we found God, and that ain't what we came for at all, you know. And this thing is really designed to sell us those 3 pertinent ideas. Now, as we look at the pertinent ideas, number 1, that you're alcoholic and cannot manage your own life, surely that's step 1. Number 2, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism, that's part of step 2. And see that God can and will is certainly the rest of step 2. So what he's really saying is, I have used all of the first part of the book to make you aware of certain facts, and if you know those facts, if you've bought into it, if I've sold them to you, then you've already taken steps 1 and 2. You see, 1 and 2 are not working steps. I hear people say, I worked on step one for 3 years after I came in AA, and I say, no, you did not do that. You don't work on step one in AA. You work on step one out there. You know, you work on step one by drinking. You work on, that's where you find out you're powerless over alcohol. We really don't work on step one. Step one is simply certain conclusions of the mind based upon facts presented to us in the doctor's opinion in the first 4 chapters. If I've read them, if I've studied them, if I've accepted those ideas, then most certainly I can see where I'm powerless over alcohol and my life has become unmanageable. Step 2 is nothing more than the conclusion of the mind drawn based on information presented in chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. You know, I came to believe that a power greater than myself can restore me to sanity. There's no work involved there. And this is like the treatment of any disease. If I'm sick and I go to a doctor, well, the first thing the doctor's going to do is find out what's wrong with me. Now, in alcoholism, I have to make a self-diagnosis. But most of my other illnesses, I end up going to a doctor, and a doctor will examine me, read symptoms, and etc., and then he will make a diagnosis and tell me what's the matter with me. Now, he may say, Charlie, I'm sorry, but you got the flu. Well, when he tells me I got the flu, that don't make me feel a bit better. Oh, I'm glad I don't have cancer or something like that, but I really am still sick when he tells me what's wrong with me. And then he writes a prescription for me. He sits down, he takes a pad and pencil in hand, and he writes out a prescription for me, and he hands me the prescription. But I don't feel any better yet. In fact, I probably feel worse because he's done got some of my money now, you know. And I'm standing there, and I know what's wrong with me, and I've got the prescription in hand, but I don't feel a bit better. In fact, Joe and I figured out what those doctors write on those prescription pads. It took us years to figure it out. You know what they say on those pads? They say, I done got $42 of this fool's money. See if you can get the rest of it. He writing a note to the pharmacist is what he's done. Now, is that right, Bertie?
That's right.
Now, I won't feel any better until I take that prescription and go down and have it filled at the pharmacist and take it home and follow the program of action that it calls for, and then hopefully I'll recover from the illness. And the same thing's true here. We now know what our problem is. We now know what the solution is, but we really don't feel any better yet. So 1 and 2 are really not considered to be recovery steps. And remember, they didn't have 1 and 2 in the old days. That was all done out there on the 12-step call. The first step that they took when they came into the fellowship was what we know today as step 3. 1 and 2, they gave that to the fellow when they went out to see him on that 12-step call. And they knew when they wrote the book that they couldn't do that, so the book would have to do that for them. I think another thing that's very apparent here is that Bill did not intend for this to be a set of suggestions. He intended for it to be a set of directions. He mentioned directions at least 3 times in it, and always in the singular, telling you what you had to do in order to recover from the disease of alcoholism. Now, of course, the other members, when they saw it, they began to blow their stack, and they began to say, Bill, you can't tell alcoholics what they're going to have to do. You can't give them directions. If you do, they're not going to do a damn thing. And part of the members said, Bill, you didn't tell them strong enough. You should have made it harder. You know how we are. Hell, you get 10 of us together in the room, throw a subject out there, we're going to split, take sides every time. One side wanted it tougher, the other side wanted it easier. Bill wanted it left just like it was. And then they said, a fellow named Jimmy Burwell, he said, Bill, what do you mean with all this God stuff in here? We don't need all this God stuff. He said, why don't you delete every bit of that and get it the hell out of here? Jimmy's the one they call the atheist. And I've seen a picture of old Jimmy, and Jimmy was sitting there with an old long stem pipe in his hand, and he is the most cold-eyed sucker. He looks exactly like an atheist ought to look, you know. If looks has got anything to do with it, Jimmy was one of them. And Jimmy and his bunch wanted all references to God out of here, period. Yeah, maybe higher power, but not God. Now remember, though, that they originally started from a group of people who were very religious in nature through the Oxford groups, And a certain faction of them wanted more religion, more God in here. And they wanted such things as thee and thou and etc. in here. So hell, the fight was on immediately when they saw this chapter 5. And for literally months, that's what all the meetings in New York City and Cleveland and Akron consisted of. People arguing about what this thing ought to say. And finally, Bill began to realize something's either going to have to be done or we're going to blow the whole thing right now. And Bill finally agreed to make some compromises at the suggestion of a non-alcoholic psychiatrist. The psychiatrist suggested, why don't you change it from directions to suggestions? He said probably more people would accept it in their lives. And he said, well, you keep saying you. He said, why don't you say we? Don't tell them what they have to do, tell them what you had to do. And he said, well, you keep saying must. He said, change that to ought. And he said, I really believe more people would use the book and use these steps for recovery. And Bill very reluctantly agreed to make these changes. Now, today we don't know. Now, instead of 1.5 million today, if the changes had not been made, we might have 10 million in AA. But also, instead of 1.5 million today, we might have 10,000 in AA too. We don't know. Nobody knows. Nobody will ever know that. We simply know that's the history behind this particular part of the book. But in the reading of this, then it makes more sense as to what Bill was trying to do. Also, you're going to find that even though directions were deleted here, they were put back in later on. Because Bill agreed to compromise with them. And he said, I'll compromise with you on one condition. They said, what's that? He said, that you allow me to be the final authority on the rest of the book. He said, that's the only way I'm going to write it because I'm tired of arguing and tired of fighting.
May I have your attention, please? Will passenger Benjamin Atty please contact the purser's desk on deck number 4? Passenger Mr. Benjamin Atty, please contact the purser's desk.
And he said, if you're not going to let me do that, then you will have to write the rest of the book. Well, they didn't want to give him that authority, but neither did they want to write the book either. So they very reluctantly agreed to let Bill do that. Now, what he knew, but what they didn't know, he's going to put directions right back into it 2 pages later. And all the rest of the way through the book, it talks about directions, not suggestions. And if we can go back and see this in the original, then we can see the continuity of the book, and we can see what Bill originally intended for us. Now, later when they changed it, and they dropped the selling of the 3 pertinent ideas, and the idea that if you don't have it up to this point, you ought to go back and reread the book or else throw it away, one of the two, they just simply did away with some of the things that he had in mind. Because now, let's read the last part of the how it works as we usually read it. And it says, being convinced, we were at step 3. Being convinced of what? And where in the hell did 1 and 2 go? See? I used to read that thing up at here, and I would read the description, alcoholic, chapter, the agnostic, personal adventures before and after, make clear 3 pertinent ideas. I would read those 3 things, and then it would say, being convinced, we were at step 3. And I'd say, where in the hell did 1 and 2 go? Finally, when we saw the original manuscript, we realized where 1 and 2 went. That's all we've been talking about on this trip so far as the big book is concerned. We've been discussing step 1 and step 2 up to this point all the way through. Now, if we're convinced on those ideas, we are now ready to go on to step 3. Now, from step 3 on, the book will tell you why you need to work a step, how to work it, and what the results will be. But it didn't do that with step 1 and 2 because they are not working steps. Okay, being convinced, we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood Him. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Let's look at a few words again. If we don't understand the words the way the writer understands them, the information that comes through is going to be garbled. And I think there's 3 words in step 3 that gives most of us a lot of trouble. The first one is the word decision. I hear people today say, well, I turned my will and my life over to the care of God as I understood Him 3 years ago, and my life's all still screwed up, and I don't understand why. Really, they didn't turn it over 3 or 4 years ago. They made a decision to turn it over. And the decision itself implies that we're going to have to take further action. And if we don't take the action to carry out the decision, we'll never get it done. I think a good example in my life is Barbara and I every fall, we would decide that we were going to go to Los Angeles, California and visit relatives. And we would make that decision every fall, but we didn't do anything about it, and we didn't get to California to visit the relatives. But one year we made the decision, and I took my car down and had it serviced. Barbara packed the clothes and put a little food in the car, and we got in my car and we drove it from my home to Tulsa, Oklahoma. Then to Oklahoma City, then to Amarillo, Texas, and then to Albuquerque, and then to Flagstaff. And one day we ended up in Los Angeles visiting relatives. Not because we made the decision, but because we took the action necessary to carry out the decision. If we could turn our will over to the care of God as we understand Him in step 3, then we would not need the rest of the steps. The other steps are to carry out that decision that we're making in step 3. The other steps, 4 through 9 especially, are action steps which carry that decision out. Now, what is it we decided to turn over? Well, we decided to turn our will over. And our will is nothing more than our mind. We've already seen that the main problem of the alcoholic centers in the mind rather than in the body. And we're making a decision to turn our will, our mind, our thinking apparatus over to the care of God as we understand Him. Now, I think a good example of that is if I'm approaching the end of my life and I've gathered up a few material things and put them together, and I'm beginning to be concerned about what's going to happen to them when I die, I may go down to an attorney and discuss this with him. And he'll take my thinking as of that day, and he'll write it down on a piece of paper. I'll say, I want my wife to have this, my daughter to have this, my sons to get this, and I want this to go to my brother. And he'll write all that down on a piece of paper. And then he'll sign it, probably have his secretary witness it, and then they'll put it in the safe. Now, the day I die, they rush me out of that cemetery. They get me in the ground as fast as they can, and they hurry back to that lawyer's office. And he gets that piece of paper out of there.
Please. Mr. Otti of cabin 6015. Please contact the purser's office. That's Mr. Otti of cabin 6015. Please contact the purser's office. Thank you.
He gets that piece of paper out of there, and he sits down and he reads to them what my thinking was of that day in his office. And of course, we know that we call that a will. Will, mind, and thinking all go together. Now, what's our life? Well, our life is nothing more than our actions. What I am today, right now, this moment, full stomach and all, is the result of all the actions that I've taken throughout my entire lifetime, is what's got me right here, this moment, right now. Now, all action is born in thought. All action is born in thought. Sometimes we react so fast, so automatically, we think that we don't think. But my body cannot act unless my mind tells it to do so. Now, I've had a difficult problem in my lifetime. In years past, some of my thinking has been rather faulty. And some of that faulty thinking led to some pretty lousy decisions. And then those lousy decisions led to some pretty bad actions. And then those bad actions screwed me and everybody else up. And then those people turned around and retaliated against me and created a hell of a lot of pain and suffering in my life. Not as the result of anything except first the way I think and then the way I act. Now the step is written, will and life. And a lot of people read it and they get it backwards. They read life and will. But life always comes after thought. And I remember when I began to look at step 3, I was scared to death of it. I went to my sponsor. I said, Neil, I don't believe I can take step 3. He said, how come? And I said, well, I don't know what God would have me be. If I turn my will and my life over to the care of God as I understand Him, He may want me to go to Africa and be a missionary. I said, hell, He may want me to go to China and work over there, and I don't want to do that. And Neil just laughed. He said, well, Charlie, at least it wouldn't be in the hands of an idiot, would it? He said, look back in your life. He said, you have always done exactly what you wanted to do. Nobody could ever tell you anything. You always knew everything. You always made your own decisions. You always took your own actions. And he said, because of that, you got to become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He said, hell, left on your own, you don't stand a chance. But he said, just think. If God could direct your thinking, then maybe it would become better. And he said, if your thinking becomes better, probably your decisions will be better. And then he said, probably your actions will be better. And he said, I'll almost bet you if your actions become better, then your life's going to become better also. But he said, if you keep on doing it the way you've done it all your life, you're going to keep on getting the same old thing over and over and over and over. And I didn't know that. I just flat did not know that. But he explained it to me very simply. Today, I think I'll know a little bit more about this thing. And the reason I know a little bit more about this thing today is because of some information that Bill gave to us, not in the big book, but in another book. When Bill wrote the big book in 1939, he didn't know a hell of a lot about human nature. Bill himself really didn't know a hell of a lot about spirituality. You know, he'd only been sober since the fall of 1934. He began to write the book in 37, finished it up in 1939. It's evident that everything in the book dealing with human nature and with spirituality had to be God directed, because Bill didn't know those things. But some years later, about 13, they prevailed upon Bill to write another book called The 12 and 12. And in The 12 and 12, in step 4, the first 2 or 3 pages, Bill gave me some of the most simple, startling information that I'd ever read in my life. He told me on 2 or 3 pages what makes me tick. He explained to me the difference between me and the other animals on the face of the earth. And he explained to me some things that he called basic instincts of life, which causes me to do the things the way that I do them. And he showed me what I'm going to have to do in my life in order to be able to keep those things in control, so I don't end up hurting people all the time. But you see, 13 years later, Bill had worked with literally thousands of alcoholics. Bill had talked to some of the leading minds in the world. He had talked to some of the finest psychiatrists, some of the finest spiritual people, and Bill knew a lot more what he was talking about in 1952 than he did in 1939. There he talks about the basic instincts of life which create this thing called self-will. This thing that I'm going to try to turn over to God. This thing that keeps driving me all the time. There's only 2 wills in the world. There's God's will and self-will. There's no other kind of will. All the other species on the face of the earth, whether it be plant, animal, fish, or what, all act and react on God's will. The human race is the only race on the face of the earth that has this thing called self-will. Now, I don't know whether it's a blessing or whether it's a curse, but we seem to be the only ones on the face of the earth that have it. They tell us in another book that I refer to as the Big, Big Book, that God at some time got lonesome, and he wanted something that he could have conversation with, that he could visit with, and he created us in his likeness. Now, I don't think that's physical. I think that's in the thing that we have intelligence. We have self-will. We can decide. We can make decisions. The other animals on the face of the earth can't really do that, but we can. And in that other book, it tells about the first 2 people that had self-will. You know, they were a couple, I think they were named Adam and Eve. And God had put them in a place that that other book refers to as the Garden of Eden. I like to refer to it as Serenity Park. You know, they, man, it must have been some place. They were in there, they were laid back. God supplied them with everything they needed. They didn't have any need for clothes. They didn't have any need for food other than what God supplied for them. They had no fear of the other animals or anything else. And God told them that you can live here in Serenity Park as long as you want to. And he said, I'll never put you out of here unless you go against my will. And he said, you can do about anything you want to in this park except eat the apple off that tree. And he said, if you eat the apple off that tree, you're going to be in serious trouble. Well, they didn't really know they had self-will because they had never exercised it before. And they didn't really know that they could eat that apple off that tree. And one day running around in Serenity Park, Eve run into a snake. And the old snake comes sidling up to Eve, and he said, Eve, why don't you and Adam eat that apple off that tree? And Eve said, well, we can't do that. And the snake said, sure you can. What makes you think you can't do that? She said, well, God told us not to. Snake probably said, who in the hell do you think he is, God? He said, you know, I can't eat that apple off that tree, but he said, you can. You've got self-will, and you can do whatever you want to do. And Eve said, I didn't know that. Snake said, you sure have. So she couldn't hardly wait to get to Adam, you know, and she told old Adam about it. And Adam said, you mean we can really eat that apple off that tree? And she said, sure, you can eat that. We can eat that apple anytime we want to. We got self-will. He said, I sure as hell didn't know that. She said, by golly, we have. And then Adam made a decision. Now, you and I today know that the decision he made was a hell of a bad decision. But you can't really knock him because he had no experience at it before. It's the first decision he had ever made, you know. And he made the decision, and he picked the apple off the tree, and they ate it. And sure enough, after a while, God came along, and he said, Adam, what happened to the apple up there in that tree? Adam said, well, we ate it. Then God said, you ate it? Adam said, yeah, we ate it. And God said, how come you'd eat the apple off the tree? And you know, we believe that Adam had to be alcoholic because immediately he turned and he said, she made me do it. And we've been blaming it on her ever since, too. You know. I expect Eve was probably the first compulsive overeater the world had ever seen, too. You know. And God said, okay, you've exercised self-will, and you're no longer following my directions, so you can't stay in Serenity Park anymore. He said, you have to leave. And he said, oh, by the way, just in case you don't understand it, let me tell you this. He said, you're going to have to supply for yourself from now on. He said, I'm not going to supply you with protection, food, clothing, whatever it is that you have to have if you don't follow my will. So he said, you're on your own from this day on. And as they started to leave, God said, wait just a moment. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll make a covenant with you. He said, you can have that self-will as long as you want it. I'll never take it back away from you until you are willing to return it to me. Now, he said, if you ever want me again to supply your needs and your wants and whatever you have to have, he said, you can give self-will back to me. And the day you give it back, then I'll take over and you begin to follow my directions and I'll supply you with everything you have to have. But he said, I love you enough that I'll let you kill yourself using self-will. He said, I'll never take it back until you freely give it back to me. And I think it's what we're really talking about when we get into this step 3 thing. You know, God loves us enough that he'll let us literally destroy our lives entirely on self-will if we wish to. And he will never take it from us until we ourselves are willing to give it back to him. But there's one thing I think we need to fully understand. At any one given moment of time, we're on one of two wills. We're either on self-will or we're on God's will. We can't be on both at the same time. And we alcoholics seem to have serious difficulty with the self-will thing, not just we alcoholics, but many people. Bill explained that a little further in the 12 and 12. He talks about these 3 instincts being absolutely necessary for survival of the human race. The first one he referred to as the social instinct. And that's not social climbing. That's really our relationship with each other. And he said every human being is born with a desire to be liked and accepted and respected by other people. And he said if we didn't have that desire, if we didn't desire to join together in groups, that probably the human race could not survive. We wouldn't be able to provide the food, clothing, and shelter that we need. If we cared nothing about each other, the world would go into complete anarchy, dog-eat-dog situation. And sooner or later, under those conditions, the human race will simply disappear from the face of the earth. This instinct that God gives to us is a God-given thing. It is good. It is absolutely necessary for our survival. It only becomes a bad thing when we carry it too far. We've got a lot of words that appear under it. Prestige, that's wanting to be recognized or to be accepted as a leader. Some of us just want to belong, but some of us want to be the leader. And God knows we need leaders. Somebody has to be the decision maker. Back in the old caveman days, somebody had to say, Mary, you get behind that tree with your spear. Jack, you get over here with your club. Mary, you get there with your rock, and Billy Joe and I'll run this sucker through him, and we'll kill him, and we'll have something to eat. Somebody has to be the decision maker. Now, some of us like to be on top of the heap, but that still depends on what other people think of us. And some of us just want to be a part of the crowd, but that still depends on what people think of us. So the words prestige and companionship fit in here just right. Self-esteem is what we think of ourselves. And that's usually based on what we think other people think of us. Such things as pride, an excessive and unjustified opinion of oneself. Most of us either feel too much, too good about ourselves, or we feel too low about ourselves, one of the two. And in either case, those opinions are usually unjustified. All of us have personal relationships. We are living in a world today where you can't get along without other people. Oh, the old hermit thinks he can up on the side of the hill, but hell, he has to come to town and get beans and bacon once in a while. All of us have relationships with other people. We all have ambitions in that area. All of us have plans to gain acceptance, power, recognition, and etc. Now, I don't think we would do the things necessary to be accepted by the rest of the human race if we didn't get something out of it. You know, if you want to be liked and accepted and respected by other people, you've got to work at it. First, you've got to determine what is it in my part of the world that they require of me. Maybe in one place it's a grade school education, maybe in another place a high school education, maybe in another place something entirely different. But we determine the goal, and we set the goal, and we begin to work and strive toward it. Just as importantly, we have to sacrifice some things. There are some things that we would like to do that if we know if we do them and they catch us, they're not going to like us at all. And I don't think we would do the work or make the sacrifice if we didn't get some kind of reward for that. And the reward is what we get at the moment of completion of the goal. Bill said it in his story. He said, I had arrived. How many of us have set that goal and worked at it and worked at it and worked at it, and finally the day comes and we get it, and oh my God, it feels good. You know, it really is a tremendous feeling. Now, the only thing wrong with it is, it don't last very long. It seems to be just a temporary feeling. We no longer reach the goal. We look around and we say, well, hell, is this all there is to it? And we set another goal. And we take off and we work and we work and we sacrifice and we reach another goal and another goal and another goal. And it seems to create an insatiable desire within us for more of the same. More money, more power, more recognition. And we're not getting there fast enough. And they're not giving it to us the way we think we ought to have it. So we begin to lie a little. And we begin to con and shortcut and cheat and manipulate people. And when we do that, then we run into difficulty with them because we hurt them. And then they in turn retaliate against us and create pain and suffering for us. It's plain that a life run on self-will can hardly ever be a success. Because under those conditions, we're always in collision with people, places, and things. Bill talks about the security instinct. He says that all human beings are born with a desire to be secure in the future. Now, I fully realize in AA we work this thing one day at a time, but I doubt if there's anybody in this room that does not have an insurance policy of some kind to protect ourselves in the future. That is a God-given thing. You know, if we were not concerned about the future, we wouldn't provide the shelter we'll need next winter. We wouldn't provide the shelter we'll need when the sun is so hot we can't stand it. If we'd worried nothing about security, we would store food and things away to have when the next drought season comes along. And in those conditions, the human race would simply fail to survive. If you're going to be secure, you're going to have to do the same thing you do with social acceptance. It's not easy to be secure. The first thing you got to do is determine, well, what is it I need to be secure? And this is going to vary in different parts of the world. One place it's $4. Another place it's 4,000. Another one it's 4 million. Another one it's 132 rocks. Whatever it is that they use to trade and barter with. And we make a decision on what we need, and we set the goal. And we work and we work and we strive and we strive. And just as importantly, you got to sacrifice. You know, if you want to be secure in the future, you can't blow everything you got today. You can't have a new automobile every time you turn around, new dress, new shoes, new suit, whatever it is. Because if you blow your money, you'll never be secure in the future. And I don't think we would do the work nor make the sacrifices necessary if we didn't get a reward. And the reward is the same thing we get with social acceptance. It's that great feeling we get at the moment of completion of the goal. How many of you have set a goal, we'll say, for a new automobile, for a new suit, for a new dress, for a new piece of property, for the new home? And my God, we work at it, and we work, and we strive for years. And we get there, and oh, the day we get it, it feels so good. It's a great feeling. But now the only thing wrong with it seems to be this temporary feeling. You no sooner get there, you look around, you say, well, hell, her house is bigger than mine. He's got a Cadillac, and I'm still driving a Chevrolet. His piece of property, his farm is much larger than mine. So that causes me then to set another goal. And I work and I work and I strive and I strive and I sacrifice and I gather more and I gather more. And it seems to create an insatiable desire for more money, more power, more prestige, more recognition. I'm not getting there fast enough, though. And they're not giving it to me the way I think they should. So I'll start doing a little lying, a little cheating, a little stealing, a little conning, a little manipulating the people. And when I do, I hurt other people. And in that they retaliate against me and create pain and suffering for me. The third basic instinct of life is that thing we call sex. Now, I know in AA, we laugh about sex a lot. We treat it sometimes as a dirty word. We talk about it a lot. We act as if we don't a lot about it. I really don't think most of us do. But the sex instinct is a basic God-given thing. Every human being is born with a desire for sex. Now, it may get turned off by bad happenings, bad teachings, etc., but every human being is born with a desire to have sex, because if we don't have sex, we're not going to reproduce the human race. And if we don't reproduce the human race, sooner or later we're going to fail to survive. So sex is not a bad thing. Sex is not a dirty thing. Sex is a God-given thing that is absolutely necessary for survival of the human race. Now, sex is just like the other two. If you're going to fulfill the basic instinct of sex, you're going to have to work at it. You know, by God, sex is hard work. Hell, you can do more work in 3 minutes of sex than you do all day digging a ditch. If you can last that long, you know. You older fellas remember, Jim, how it used to be when, my God, you fall over sideways and the sweat's just pouring off of you and you can hardly get your breath. You feel like you've died, gone to heaven, come back 2 or 3 times. And I don't think we would do that kind of work if we didn't get a reward for it. And the reward we get is that great feeling, both physically and emotionally, at the moment of successful completion of the sex act. There really is nothing like that. You know, I think that's even better than bacon and eggs. It's just something that's but yeah, grit. It's even better than grit. But just like the other two, that great feeling you get both physically and emotionally from successful completion of the sex act is just a temporary feeling. Hell, you know, no sooner get through with it than you get to thinking about doing it again. You know? And you get to think about doing it in different places. And you get to thinking about doing it with different people in different positions and in different ways. And you're not getting it like you think you ought to have it, so you begin to do a little shortcutting, lying, conning, manipulating, stealing. You start running around with the wrong people at the wrong time in the wrong place, doing it the wrong way, and etc., and you end up hurting people. And when you hurt those people and they retaliate against you and create pain and suffering for you, did you see the sex drive is an insatiable thing also, just like the other two are, left on self-will. Now, if we could do these things at the level that God intended for us to do them, there would never be any problems among the human race. If all of us could keep this social instinct exactly where God wants it, if we could keep the material or security instinct exactly where God wants it, if we could keep the sex instinct exactly where God wants it, there would be no conflict in the world today. And the only way we can do that is on God's direction. You know, God directs all the other animals on the face of the earth. And you don't see those other animals going into psychiatrist's office to be treated for nervous disorders due to not having enough money. You don't see them going into psychiatrist's office to be treated for an upset ulcer or something in the stomach because the other animals don't like them. Hell, I'm 60 years old, and I've never seen a cow on a psychiatrist's couch yet talking about sexual dysfunction. You know, they just don't do that because everything they do is at God's direction. We are the ones that create the problems for ourselves. Left on self-will, we're always going to overdo. And we're always going to hurt other people. And left on self-will, even though we use our willpower to not overdo, we're still going to be restless and irritable and discontented because we can't do those things that we want to do. Left on self-will, we're always going to be in collision with people, places, and things. So I think what we're really doing in step 3 is we're making a decision to let God direct our thinking, which in turn will control our actions, which in turn will determine what our life is going to be, so that we can find a way to live to be peaceful and happy and free. If I don't find a way to live where I can be peaceful, happy, and free, if I keep in conflict with other people all the time, there's no way I'm going to get peace of mind. And even if the other people don't catch me, if God dwells within me, which I believe He does, then I'm going to have to feel some shame, aren't I? I'm going to have to feel some guilt and remorse from these things. Certainly I'm going to have to feel fear of what are they going to do when they do catch me. So in order to have the peace of mind necessary, it looks to me like what I've got to do is try to operate on God's will to the best of my ability. And that's something I've never done before, because you remember, when I left that Baptist church, when He told me that day that to think about it is as bad as doing it, and I thought, hell, I done been thinking about it. So then I went out there and started doing it. From that day on, I never paid any attention to God's will at all. Always operate on my will. And as time went by, those things became worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And as time went by, the restlessness, the irritability, the discontent, the shame, the fear, the guilt, remorse became more and more and more. And I always had to turn right back to that bottle in order to find some relief from that stuff. And it's evident that if I continue to try to run my life, I'll always be in conflict with other people, places and things, my own conscience, and I'll never have any peace of mind. Now, that doesn't mean I like to do this. Don't get me wrong. That doesn't mean that I want to do this. But let's face the fact, we either do it or else. And for people like us, it always runs us right back to that thing that always kills us. Now, he in the big book, he talked about that as being the actor who wants to run the whole show. And self-will does that to us. As we grow up, we decide what we want to be. And we draw up in our head a little script. And we know exactly where we're going to fit into that script. We're going to be this, we're going to be that, we're going to be something else. Whatever it is, we decide we're going to be. Now, in order for us to fit into that script, though, then everybody we deal with has to fit into that script, too. You know, I wrote my little play, and I wrote a place in there for my wife. She was to be this, this, and this. And I wrote a place in there for my children. They were to be this, this, and this. And I wrote a place in there for my co-workers. They were to be that, that, and that. And hell, I even had my neighbors written into this little play. Now, I began to run the show and began to direct it. The only problem is I didn't know that my wife had written her script already. And her script didn't jive with mine. And that immediately threw us into conflict with each other. And from that day on, I was trying to exert my will on her to get things to come out the way I wanted it to be. As my children grew up, I began to realize, hell, they write their script too. And they don't want to do what I want them to do, and we go into conflict with them and with a co-worker and with a neighbor and everybody else. And Bill describes us as the actor that wants to run the whole show. And he said when the show didn't come off right, then we exert some more will on them, and we try over and over and over and over again. Sometimes we're doing it for their sake. But it doesn't make any difference whether I'm doing it for my sake or their sake. If they don't do it and that throws us in conflict, it makes me feel the same way in my head, restless, irritable, discontented, and all screwed up. And I finally had to learn that only God writes the play. Only God knows the show, and only He knows where we fit into it. And the only way we can ever fit into what God has designed us for is to follow God's direction. Not that I want to, but simply because I have to. Now, if we look a little further in step 3, it'll tell us how to go about turning this thing over. If we go over to page 62, selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Now, Bill knew that in 39, he just didn't know why. He told us why, though, in 52, when he wrote the 12 and 12. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some point in the past we've made a decision based on self which later placed us in a position to be hurt. Now, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves, and the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run right, though he usually doesn't think so. Now, all those troubles I had, I didn't think they were of my own making. I thought it was of other people creating all those problems. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without His aid. Many of us have had moral and philosophical convictions galore, but we could not live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own part. We had to have God's help. I think the greatest mistake being made in AA today is this: self-will trying to overcome self-will, trying to make ourselves better, and we can't do that. Self-will is a God-given thing, and only God has the power to overcome whatever He makes. And only God has the power to overcome self-will. We can't do it by ourselves. If we could, we would not have become alcoholics. If we could, we would not have become overeaters. If we could, we would not have had all those troubles we had if self could overcome self. But we simply cannot do that. This is the how and why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. I read that one day and I just laughed. Hell, that's all I've ever done all my life. I've tried to control me and everybody and everything around me, and I just knew if they would do what I told them to do, then everything would be okay, And I've played God forever. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God was going to be our director. You see there? 2 pages later, He put director right back in the book. He is the principal, we are His agents. He is the Father, and we are His children. Most good ideas are simple. And this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. This is the third reference now to this thing we're building. Willingness was the foundation. Belief was the cornerstone. And now He's fitting into place this simple little idea that God's going to be the director of our lives is going to be the keystone of this thing. And the keystone, when it fits in place, as you know, they used to build the old arches. And God knows we've had an opportunity to see many of them the last few days. And those arches were built first with a wooden form. And the stones would be stacked from the side up on this wooden form. And then the final stone that went in place had to be cut and fit just right. And if it was cut and fit right, then these stones on the side would lean against it, and then they could remove the wooden form, and the arch would stand up. And they call that stone the keystone. And if it's not right, then the whole arch is going to collapse. So here He's referring to the keystone, and he's telling us the thing we're building. We're building a new and triumphant arch, and we're going to pass through it to freedom. God, I just love the way this guy writes. He paints these pictures in our mind, and it gets me excited. I want to see, well, what the hell is going to happen? When am I going to go through that arch? You know, how am I going to take that step through that arch? But the keystone of the arch itself is a simple little idea. We're going to let God be the director of our life, rather than be self-directed people. When we sincerely took such a position, all sorts of remarkable things happened. We had a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provided what we needed if we kept close to him and performed his work well. Remember, he made the covenant with those two people before. He said, when you give self-will back to me, then I will provide you with what you need. And if we turn self-will back to God, then certainly he's going to provide us with everything we have to have. Established on such a footing, we became less and less interested in ourselves, our little plans and designs. More and more, we became interested in seeing what we could contribute to life. Those of us that always took from life can now begin to be interested in what can we put back into life. What can we contribute to life? How can we help other people? As we felt new power flow in, as we enjoyed peace of mind, as we discovered we could face life successfully, as we became conscious of his presence, we begin to lose our fear of today, tomorrow, or the hereafter. We were reborn. Not in the body, but in the mind, in the psychic, in the emotional makeup. We were now at step 3. Many of us said to ourselves, as we understood him, God, I offer myself to thee, to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. We thought well before taking this step, making sure we were ready, that we could at last abandon ourselves utterly to him. Now, we're asking God to take it all. We're not asking him just to take the alcohol. I think it's a great mistake we make in AA. We would like to have God take the drinking, but God don't mess with my sex life. Now, I'll take care of that. And God, don't you interfere with my business, because I know what I want to do over here, but you take my drinking. Well, the fallacy in that is God don't even drink. He doesn't want that. He wants us. He wants it all back. And the day we give it all back, then and only then will God be willing to take over. He can certainly do it in a very beautiful way. We found it very desirable to take this spiritual step with an understanding person, such as a wife, best friend, or spiritual advisor. You remember when the Oxford groups were first going, and when AA first got started before it had a name, they used to go upstairs in Dr. Bob's house, take the new person, 3, 4, 5, or 6 of them, and they would all get on their knees, and they would all take this thing together. And I see a lot of people in AA going back and doing it again today. And I've done it 2 or 3 times myself with another human being, and I'll tell you, it's really something spectacular. Not only does it seem to help the new person, but it seems to reaffirm in the older members what we're trying to do. And I think it's a hell of a thing to do. If you've never tried it before, try it once or twice. First time you do it, you feel funny, or you may even feel embarrassed, or you may feel a little dumb. But you do it 2 or 3 times, and there'll be a feeling come over you that I've never experienced any other way. And I think it comes from us trying to help another human being in the taking of this step 3. And the end result is we end up helping ourselves more than we do them. But it's better to meet God alone than one who might misunderstand. The wording was, of course, quite optional, so long as we expressed the idea, voicing it without reservation. This was only a beginning, though it's honestly and humbly made an effect. Sometimes a very great one was felt at once. The people are afraid of step 3. We don't need to be afraid of step 3. Step 3 is not a negative step, it's a positive step. If we take this step to the best of our ability, we're going to get some effect from it. Sometimes a great effect, like Bill got. Most of us, though, it won't be that great, but we will feel something out of it. And what it really does, I think, is remove enough self-will to let us get on with the rest of the program. And there's no way that I can take an inventory or anything else unless I have taken step 3 and got rid of some self-will. Comments, questions, criticism? I Well, that leaves me wide open when I say that. You know, I used to teach school in a private aeronautical school, and at the end of the day, on the subject matter, I'd always say, "Do you have any questions, comments, or criticism?" Once in a while, I would get to damn criticism too. I might ought to be careful with that. Questions?
I'm Mariel, and I'm an Al-Anon. Would you go over what you just said about taking a new person up? And I didn't understand. I understood you got on your knees and prayed with them, but I didn't understand what point you were with them. I mean, did you pray step 3 to them?
Most of them, yeah. Most of the new people, and it's like me. Hell, I don't know a lot about praying, but I know this prayer. And most of the time when we do this, we get the book out. And 3 or 4 of us have the book right there in front of us. And we will say the prayer as it comes out of the book. And it really does work. It really does work. And not only does it help them, but it helps us too. I'm convinced of that. I don't know. We alcoholics are hard-headed people. We're stubborn, we're bullheaded, we're prideful. And the new person really doesn't want to do this with other human beings. They feel embarrassed or ashamed, and I think it's damn good for them to do it. I think that's a breakdown of the producing a little humility. That's getting rid of a little bit of self. And I think they're amazed when they get through with it. It really wasn't as bad as they thought it was going to be anyhow. Questions?
I'm going through a tragic part of my life. I had started saying, "Oh, by the way, I'm Mary Elizabeth. I'm a member of OA." And I started say step 3. And in here I say, "Take away my difficulties of the day." And just as you say, it works right away. Just by just inserting that little of the day. Thank you.
My sponsor used to tell everybody that when I said this prayer, he said, "Charlie said, God, I offer myself to thee to deal with me and do with me thy will. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will." And he said, a deep voice said, "What an order. I don't believe I can go through with it." Any other comments? Jim?
I'm Jim, and I'm an alcoholic. Personal experience of trying to take one, trying to be convinced, the 2 words being convinced. I really didn't read those for 5 years of program. And I'm taking 3. I know the 3rd step prayer by memory. You do it every day, but until I could become convinced that a power greater than myself and really turn it over. That's step 3. If I skipped that, I really had a terrible problem. I've had severe depression and everything. I'd be convinced of the first 2 steps. I never even saw those 2 words for 5 years.
I think that's why it is so important that we use the book as it's designed to be used, to convince us of those first 2 steps before we get to how it works. If we have a newcomer go to chapter 5, they're trying to take step 3, and they've never been convinced yet of the powerlessness, or they haven't come to believe. Well, there's no way you can take 3 unless you're convinced of the first 2. Any other comments? Diane?
I know when I came to this step, I thought, well, what is God's will for me? And I toiled around with that for quite a bit until I started doing a study with some ladies with the big book. And I remember leaving there one day, and I said, my God, it came to me, Yeah, I thought God's revealing His word to me and His will for me through His book. And so, for me, anyway, it's helped.
Yeah.
Of course.
Any other comments?
My name is Diane. I'm a grateful alcoholic. I know when I took the 3rd step prayer with my sponsor, there was some humility that came out. It was embarrassing to get down on my knees and to recite a prayer from a book that I didn't understand at the time, that I didn't know. She knew it by heart, which most of us, once we've been in the program for any length of time, if we've read the book enough or studied it or whatever, that we learn it. But I felt probably that was definitely a spiritual experience for me for the first time. And my only criticism, and not of you, but of Bill Wilson, was that he did not put the 3rd step prayer in the 12 and 12 again.
Mm-hmm.
because there are people in some of the step studies that we go to, and it becomes real apparent when you read the third step in the 12 and 12 that they have never heard of the third step prayer. Just like a lot of them haven't heard of the seventh step prayer or any of the others. But the third step prayer, I think, was so important. And in my sharing it at meetings, I've had several people come up and say, I never knew it was in the big book. I never knew that there was an actual prayer. And until I went and found it, I know that I hadn't been taking step 3.
It is hard to believe, but there are some people in AA that's been in AA 4 or 5 years and have never read the big book. Damn hard for me to believe that, but it's true. It's absolutely true. Joan, did you?
My name is Joan, and I am an alcoholic. When you started talking about the third step and the third step prayer, I'd like to share a little story with you that, as it happened to me. I thought I had taken my third step. I went through and I read the third step carefully in the big book, but I did not read that part that said it suggested. I read the part and heard the part that said I could do it by myself if I wanted to. And that's the way I did it in the beginning. And that much allowed me to write my fourth step. And it allowed me to write my fifth step, or to do my fifth step with another person. And then came time for me to go home after that fifth step and get on my knees and do step 6 and step 7. And following that, I began to drive myself crazy and everybody else around me because I was trying to fix me. I had found a pattern of my grosser handicaps, of my grosser character defects, and my problem areas that I had done and set myself up for over and over again. And I tried to start doing things that would make myself stop doing these things. And I really got in a dither. And I called a friend in my home group, and I said, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm trying to do this, and I'm trying to do that. And Jack's beautiful comment was shown, who did you take your third step with? And I explained to him how I'd done my third step, and he said, would you please go back and read it to me? Go get it right now, and let's read it together. And we did. And I thought, oh, my God, I'd read it, and I hadn't heard it. And I called a friend. And the friend was in the program, and he came to my house, and he got down on his knees with me. And I read that third step prayer out of the big book to him. And tears came, and it was an emotional thing, but it was a relief. All of a sudden, this program became more clear to me. It was, like you said, I needed to let God correct my actions. I needed to be willing. I needed to ask his direction, just as it tells me to do. And I need to be willing to let him do that for me. And I have found, since doing that the things that I used to do and that are still somewhat in my life, although to a lesser degree than they used to be, that have made me unhappy, are lessening a little at a time. As I become more and more willing to let those things go, God removes those things from me. And those quick fixes, those things that I choose to call quick fixes now. The plays with the ego at the office, sexual games that you used to play for attraction with men. Anything that was of a self-gratification type thing that I have done that's prevalent in my life, they no longer fix. The quick fixes are gone in my life, and so I don't do those as much as I used to do anymore. And I think what I'm trying to say is God's doing that for me.
Sure.
He's removing the compulsion from me. And it was the starting place was getting down on my knees with another person and doing that third step. I got clear into 6 and clear into 7, had to backtrack and pick it all up. And I guess that's what they mean by a couple of steps forward and 14 backwards, and then you start all over again. And thanks.
Thank you. Used to when people were saying the book was being written, people were saying don't talk too much about God. Don't talk too much about prayer. The alcoholics won't accept that. And Henrietta Sarbley, who was the first non-alcoholic to really, really assist us, she said that's exactly what they need in their life. She said they've been doing what they want to do all their life, and that's why they're in the mess they're in now. By God, they better listen to God or somebody. And she was looking at us from the outside, and she could see what we needed. We didn't want it. We didn't like it. We fought against it. But self-will makes us do that. And the more self-will we are, the longer we're going to fight it. We're not weak-willed people. Our problem is we're strong-willed people. We just don't give up till we absolutely have to. I didn't tell you all that our tour director today happened to be a Southern Baptist preacher. He told us for just as soon as we got in that vehicle, too. That's what he was. I'm through for the evening.
This will conclude Charley's discussion of Chapter 5, How It Works, through Step 3. Participating in any cruise is a real experience, and there are many shows and other activities that take place on the cruise. On the Serenity Sail and the Big Book Cruise, the comedy team of Larry Allen and Mike Shane told the following story as the first joke in their routine. It has some application to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Follies Lounge. Royal Caribbean Cruise Line is proud to present the sovereign of the sea variety hour. Starring the juggling artistry of the Studios. And the comedy stars Larry Allen and Mike Shane. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the comedy stars of our show, Larry